The truth about the Ascended Collective's parasitic nature spread through the Grand Chamber like a shockwave, shattering the foundations of galactic civilization in a matter of moments. The energy beings that had ruled as gods for millions of years now faced something they had never encountered before: the unified defiance of their subjects. Captain Ryan Davis stepped forward into the center of the chamber, his voice carrying the weight of history as he addressed both the collective and the assembled representatives of hundreds of species. The question now is simple. What do we do next? Do we allow fear of the unknown to drive us back into servitude, or do we have the courage to forge a new path forward together? The largest member of the collective, whose form had been steadily growing more unstable as their power waned, made one final attempt to reassert their authority. "You fools! You have no idea what forces you are unleashing. Without our guidance, the galaxy will tear itself apart within a generation." But even as the entity spoke, its words carried less conviction than before. The doubt that had infected their consciousness was growing stronger with each passing moment, fed by the resistance of the species they had once controlled without question. Admiral Susan Clark, humanity's most decorated military commander, chose that moment to make her entrance into the chamber. She had been waiting aboard the human fleet that was positioned just outside collective space, ready to respond if the diplomatic mission failed. Now she walked into the Grand Chamber accompanied by a small team of human officers, her presence adding weight to humanity's position. "Great ones," she said while addressing the collective directly. "I come here not as a conqueror or destroyer, but as someone offering you a choice. The age of cosmic hierarchies is ending whether you accept it or not. The only question is whether that ending comes through cooperation or conflict." The Admiral activated a holographic communicator that displayed images from across the galaxy. Dozens of species were already beginning to withdraw from collective space, reclaiming territories that had been forbidden to them for millennia. Ancient technologies were being rediscovered and activated. Most importantly, civilizations were beginning to communicate with each other directly for the first time in ages. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stepped beside the Admiral and displayed her archaeological findings one final time. The evidence shows that galactic civilization was far more advanced before the collective imposed their order than it has been since. Species worked together, shared knowledge freely, and achieved wonders that we can barely imagine today. Commander Zal Theta of the surviving Karathi raised his voice to address the entire assembly. "My people remember the old ways. The time before the sacred protocols when species met as equals rather than subjects and overlords. We remember what it felt like to dream without limits." One by one, representatives from across the galaxy began to stand and speak. The Velthari talked about artistic visions that had been suppressed for generations. The Nexari described scientific theories that they had been forbidden to pursue. The Zephyrians spoke of exploration missions that had been cancelled by collective decree. Professor Kate Williams realized what was happening and began translating the growing chorus of voices into a unified message. "They're not talking about rebellion or revenge," she announced to the chamber. "They're talking about hope, about the possibility of becoming more than they ever imagined possible." The 5 members of the Ascended Collective were now barely maintaining coherent forms as their power continued to drain away. The smallest of them, who had shown the most doubt throughout the proceedings, suddenly spoke in a voice that sounded almost human. "What if we were wrong?" it asked while its energy form flickered between different states of existence. "What if the order we imposed was not protection but imprisonment? What if we became the very thing we originally sought to prevent?" The question sent ripples of shock through both the collective and the assembled delegates. For the first time in millions of years, one of the cosmic entities was showing genuine uncertainty about their actions. Captain Davis seized on this moment of vulnerability and made an offer that would change the course of galactic history. "You don't have to be our enemies," he said while looking directly at the wavering energy beings. "You could choose to be our partners instead. Your knowledge and experience could help guide the galaxy toward a better future, but as advisors rather than rulers." Admiral Clark nodded in agreement and expanded on the captain's offer. "We're proposing the formation of a free worlds coalition, where species cooperate as equals rather than subjects and overlords. Your wisdom would be valued but not enforced. Your advice would be welcome but not mandatory." The largest member of the collective pulsed with what might have been confusion. "You would trust beings who have oppressed you for so long? You would offer partnership to those who sought to limit your potential? Dr. Alex Johnson stepped forward with his scientific instruments showing the quantum patterns that were flowing through the chamber. Trust has to start somewhere. The interference patterns we're generating show that our consciousness types are naturally compatible. We could achieve far more working together than any of us could accomplish alone. Lieutenant Commander Ben Parker displayed tactical analysis on his data screens for everyone to see. The old system is already collapsing. Species are withdrawing from collective space faster than you could stop them, even if you had full power. The choice isn't between order and chaos, it's between cooperation and irrelevance. The Zephyrian ambassador, Velazarian, approached the thrones where the collective sat and spoke in a voice filled with centuries of suppressed emotion. Great ones, my people have served you faithfully for 10,000 years. We followed every protocol, obeyed every command, surrendered every dream that didn't fit your vision of cosmic order. But now we remember what we were before we became your subjects. We remember what we could be again. The ambassador's words seemed to break something fundamental in the collective's consciousness. The 5 energy beings began to change, their forms becoming less alien and more recognizable as they shed the cosmic personas they had maintained for so long. The smallest member of the collective was the first to speak in its new voice. We were explorers once, like you. We sought knowledge and understanding, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. But somewhere along the way we became afraid. Afraid of change, afraid of losing control, afraid of being surpassed by those who came after us. The revelation continued as each member of the collective began to remember their origins. They had been physical beings once, representatives of 5 different species who had achieved transcendence through cooperation rather than domination. But over the millennia, they had grown afraid of losing their position and had gradually transformed, from guides into tyrants. Admiral Clark looked around the chamber at the hundreds of species representatives and saw something that had not existed for millions of years. Genuine hope for the future. The galaxy is big enough for all of us to grow and explore without limiting each other. We don't need rulers or subjects. We need partners. The largest member of the collective, whose form was now stable for the first time since the proceedings began, made a decision that would echo through history. You are right. The age of cosmic hierarchies must end. We have maintained order through fear for too long, and in doing so, we have prevented the very growth and progress that we originally sought to protect. One by one, the members of the Ascended Collective began to step down from their thrones. As they did, the crystalline structure of the celestial nexus began to change around them. The oppressive atmosphere of absolute authority was replaced by something that felt more like a meeting. Place for equals. Captain Davis looked around the transformed chamber and spoke the words that would define the new age of galactic civilization. Then let's build something better together. Not a hierarchy with rulers and subjects, but a community of free beings working toward common goals. The formation of the Free Worlds Coalition began immediately, with species after species pledging to work together as equals rather than compete for dominance. The former members of the collective offered their knowledge and experience freely, serving as advisors rather than commanders. Dr. Rodriguez established archaeological teams made up of researchers from dozens of different species to explore the forbidden ruins and recover the lost knowledge of their ancestors. Professor Williams created translation networks that allowed civilizations to communicate directly without intermediaries. For the first time in millennia, Admiral Clark organized joint exploration missions that pushed into previously forbidden regions of space, discovering wonders that had been hidden from galactic civilization for millions of years. Most importantly, species began to remember what it felt like to dream without limits. Commander Jake Martinez, who had started this journey as a simple exploration vessel captain, found himself promoted to admiral and placed in charge of the first truly integrated galactic fleet. As he stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching ships from hundreds of different species working together in perfect coordination, he realized that humanity had given the galaxy something more precious than technology or military might. The Grand Chamber erupted into chaos as the revelation spread among the assembled delegates, like a wildfire consuming dry grass. Species that had not dared to speak above a whisper in the presence of the collective for millions of years suddenly found their voices rising in questions, demands, and accusations. The perfect order that the energy beings had maintained for so long was crumbling before their very eyes. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, humanity's chief archaeologist, stepped forward with a data case that she had been carrying since their arrival at the Celestial Nexus. She was a small woman with silver hair and steady hands, but her voice carried the authority of someone who had spent her life uncovering buried truths. "There's something else you all need to see," she announced while activating a holographic projector that filled the chamber with three-dimensional images of ancient ruins. These are archaeological findings from sites scattered across the outer edges of collective space, sites that have been declared forbidden to all civilizations for reasons that were never explained. The holographic display showed massive stone structures covered with intricate carvings and symbols that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. The architecture was unlike anything created by any known species, yet there was something hauntingly familiar about the designs that made everyone in the chamber feel a deep sense of recognition. Professor Kate Williams immediately began analyzing the symbols with her translation equipment, but what she found made her face go pale with shock. "These aren't random alien writings," she said while her instruments worked to decode the ancient language. "These are messages, instructions, warnings left behind by civilizations that existed before the collective's rise to power." The largest member of the Ascended Collective, whose energy form had been growing more unstable by the minute, suddenly blazed with renewed fury. "You have violated sacred space. Those ruins are forbidden for reasons beyond your comprehension. The knowledge they contain is too dangerous for lesser species to understand." But Dr. Rodriguez was already displaying more images from her archaeological surveys. Entire cities carved from living rock, with technologies that seemed to blend science and art in ways that current galactic civilization had never achieved. Libraries containing information stored in crystalline matrices that could hold the knowledge of entire worlds. Most shocking of all were the statues and murals that depicted beings who looked exactly like the current members of various galactic species, but showing them achieving wonders that their modern descendants had never imagined possible. "This is what you've all lost," Dr. Rodriguez announced to the assembled delegates. "These ruins show what your ancestors accomplished before the collective imposed their cosmic order. The Zephyrians once created living starships that could travel between dimensions. The Karathi developed healing technologies that could restore life to the dead. The Velthari built machines that could turn thoughts into physical reality." The Zephyrian ambassador, Velazarian, stared at the holographic images, with tears streaming down his blue-tinted face. "The legends speak of such things, but we were told they were myths. Stories created to make us feel better about our limitations. They weren't myths," Dr. Rodriguez continued while displaying more evidence from her excavations. "They were memories. Cultural memories of what your species achieved before. They were convinced to surrender their potential to beings who promised them safety and order in exchange for obedience. The collective members were now flickering so rapidly that it was difficult to look directly at them. Their energy forms seemed to be fighting some kind of internal battle between maintaining their power and facing the truth that was being revealed. The smallest of the 5 entities suddenly spoke in a voice that sounded different from the others, less commanding and more desperate. "The universe was chaos before we brought order. Species warred endlessly. Entire star systems were destroyed in conflicts that served no purpose. We prevented galactic annihilation by establishing the sacred protocols." Lieutenant Commander Ben Parker stepped forward with his own data tablet, displaying military analysis that he had been conducting since their arrival at the Nexus. Actually, the historical records show something very different. Yes, there were conflicts between species, but they were resolved through diplomacy and cooperation far more often than through warfare. The galactic wars that you claim to have prevented were actually quite rare. Captain Ryan Davis looked around the chamber at the hundreds of representatives from across the galaxy and saw something that gave him hope. They were listening, really listening for the first time in millions of years. "The question we need to ask ourselves is simple," he said in a voice that carried to every corner of the vast space. "Do we want to continue living as subjects in someone else's empire? Or do we want to reclaim our birthright as free beings capable of determining our own destinies?" The response was immediate and overwhelming. Voices rose throughout the chamber as species after species began to speak about dreams and ambitions that they had buried for so long that they had almost forgotten they existed. The Karathi talked about wanting to explore the mysteries of consciousness. The Veltari spoke of artistic visions that they had never been allowed to express. The Nexari described scientific theories that they had been forbidden to investigate. Dr. Alex Johnson looked at his instruments and saw that the interference patterns generated by human consciousness were growing stronger as more species joined their cause. The collective's power is directly tied to the belief systems of those they rule, he announced to the chamber. As long as everyone accepted their authority without question, they could maintain their abilities. But doubt weakens them, and defiance makes them vulnerable. The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembled delegates as they realized that they had always possessed the power to free themselves. They had simply never believed it was possible. The collective had maintained their rule not through superior force, but through carefully cultivated fear and dependency. Commander Zal Theta, the military representative of the Karathi survivors, stood up from his position near the back of the chamber. He was a tall, warrior-like being whose species had been nearly extinct since the collective destroyed their homeworld 2 centuries ago. If this is true, then we demand an accounting for the crimes committed against our people. We demand justice for the billions who died simply because we dared to develop defensive technologies. The collective's response was swift and terrible. They attempted to silence the Karathi commander by targeting him with the same reality-warping power that had destroyed his homeworld. Energy lanced across the chamber with the force of a collapsing star. But something unprecedented happened. The attack failed. Instead of being annihilated, Commander Zal Theta remained standing exactly where he was. The collective's energy beam struck some kind of invisible barrier around him and dispersed harmlessly into the crystalline structure of the chamber. Every being present realized that they were witnessing the impossible, the failure of the collective's ultimate weapon. Captain Davis looked at his scanning equipment and saw the truth of what was happening. The interference patterns aren't just coming from humans anymore, he announced to the chamber. Every species that has rejected the collective's authority is generating the same kind of quantum resonance. You're all developing natural resistance to their power. The smallest member of the collective suddenly broke away from the others, its energy form taking on a more stable appearance as it moved closer to the assembled delegates. When it spoke, its voice was different, less commanding and more pleading. You don't understand what you're doing, it said while its form flickered between different states of existence. Without the cosmic order, without the sacred protocols, the galaxy will return to chaos. Species will war against each other until nothing remains but dead worlds and broken dreams. Dr. Rodriguez looked up at the energy being with something that might have been pity in her eyes. Is that what you tell yourselves to justify what you've done? That you're protecting us from ourselves? That we're too primitive and dangerous to be trusted with our own freedom? It's not justification, the entity replied with what sounded like genuine sadness. It's truth. We have seen what happens when species are left to their own devices. We have watched civilizations destroy themselves over and over again. The order we imposed was the only way to prevent endless cycles of death and destruction. Professor Williams finished her analysis of the ancient texts and looked up with an expression of understanding mixed with horror. You weren't trying to protect anyone, she said while her translation equipment displayed her findings for everyone to see. You were trying to protect yourselves. The historical records show that you were once physical beings like the rest of us. You achieved transcendence by absorbing the life force and potential of other species. Every civilization that you've limited and controlled has been feeding your power for millions of years. The truth hung in the air like a toxic cloud, poisoning the last remnants of the collective's authority. They had not been the benevolent guardians that they claimed to be. The crushing weight of the ascended collective's psychic presence filled the grand chamber like thick water, making it difficult for most species to even breathe properly. Captain Ryan Davis felt the enormous pressure trying to force him to his knees, but he planted his feet firmly on the crystalline floor and refused to bow. Behind him, Dr. Alex Johnson and Professor Kate Williams stood equally resolute, their human stubbornness proving stronger than the cosmic beings expected. The 5 energy entities that made up the collective pulsed with what seemed like surprise at this display of defiance. No species had ever remained standing in their presence for more than a few seconds. The very fact that these small biological creatures could resist their overwhelming power was disturbing to beings who had grown Accustomed to absolute obedience from every corner of the galaxy, Captain Davis took a deep breath and stepped forward, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber, despite the otherworldly energies swirling around him. Great ones, you speak of cosmic order and predetermined destinies. But I must ask you a simple question. Who decided that order? Who determined these destinies that you enforce so ruthlessly? The largest of the collective's members, a being whose form contained what looked like entire star systems within its energy patterns, focused its attention on the human captain. When it spoke, its voice bypassed sound entirely and communicated directly with the minds of everyone present. We are the Ascended Collective. We have guided galactic civilization for millions of years. Our wisdom spans eons, and our power maintains the balance that keeps chaos from consuming all things. The cosmic order exists because we will it to exist. Dr. Johnson stepped up beside his captain, his scientific mind already working to understand what they were dealing with. But that doesn't answer the question, does it? You didn't create the universe. You didn't give birth to the species that populate it. You simply decided that you had the right to control everything and everyone, based on your own desires. A ripple of shock ran through the assembled delegates from across the galaxy. No one had ever spoken to the collective in such terms before. The Zephyrian ambassador, Velazarian, looked absolutely horrified at the humans' boldness and tried to signal them to stop speaking before they made things worse for everyone. Professor. Williams activated her translation equipment and began speaking in multiple alien languages simultaneously, addressing the various species representatives who filled the chamber. Fellow beings, look around you. Look at what we've all become. We cower before these entities not because they created us or because they have some divine right to rule, but simply because they have more power than we do. The collective's response was immediate and terrible. Energy crackled through the chamber as they attempted to demonstrate their supremacy by crushing the defiant humans with pure psychic force. The pressure was enormous, like being at the bottom of an ocean made of liquid metal, but something unexpected happened. Instead of being crushed, the humans remained standing. Their minds seemed to generate some kind of natural resistance to the collective's power, a phenomenon that no one in the chamber could understand or explain. The energy beings pressed harder, pouring more power into their attack, but the humans continued to resist. Lieutenant Commander Ben Parker, who had remained silent until now, spoke up from his position behind the diplomatic team. As humanity's military strategist, he had been observing everything with the trained eye of someone who understood conflict and power dynamics. "You're afraid of us?" he said quietly. But his words carried throughout the chamber with perfect clarity. "That's why we're really here. Not because we've broken some cosmic law, but because we represent something that terrifies you. The possibility that your absolute power isn't as absolute as you thought." The collective's energy forms flickered and wavered as if his words had struck them like physical blows. For the first time in millions of years, doubt crept into their cosmic consciousness. How could these primitive biological creatures resist their power? How could they continue to stand when beings far more advanced had crumbled at the first touch of their psychic might? Captain Davis seized on this moment of uncertainty and continued his defense of humanity. "You speak of maintaining order and preventing chaos, but look at what your order has accomplished. Every species in this chamber lives in fear. They've stopped growing, stopped exploring, stopped dreaming of what they might become. You haven't created order. You've created a galactic graveyard where civilizations go to die slowly." Dr. Johnson pulled out a data tablet and began displaying information that he had compiled during their journey to the Nexus. "We've studied the historical records of every major civilization in the galaxy. Do you know what we found? Every single one of them was more advanced, more creative, and more innovative before they encountered your collective than they were afterward." The doctor's words were supported by hard data that appeared on holographic displays throughout the chamber. Charts and graphs showed the technological and cultural decline that had affected every species after they submitted to the collective's rule. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Professor Williams addressed the alien delegates directly, speaking in their own languages to make sure her message was understood. The Karathi Empire was developing quantum communication systems that could have connected every corner of the galaxy instantaneously. The Vilthari Confederation was creating art forms that expressed concepts beyond current understanding. The Nexari had begun to unlock the secrets of consciousness itself. Where are those achievements now? Murmurs began to spread through the assembled representatives as they realized the truth of what the humans were saying. Species that had not spoken to each other in centuries began to exchange glances and whispered conversations. For the first time in millennia, the perfect order of the collective's domain was showing cracks. The Zephyrian ambassador, Felizarian, stood up slowly and looked directly at the energy beings on their thrones. His voice shook with emotion as he spoke. Is this true, Great Ones? Have you been limiting our potential rather than guiding it? Before the collective could answer, other voices began to join the growing chorus of questions. The Karathi representative demanded to know why their homeworld had been destroyed for developing defensive technologies. The Velthari asked why their artists were forbidden from exploring certain forms of expression. Dozens of other species began voicing complaints and concerns that they had kept buried for generations. The collective's response was swift and brutal. They attempted to silence the growing rebellion by demonstrating their power on a massive scale. Energy lanced out from their forms, targeting several of the most vocal alien delegates. But something went wrong with their display of cosmic might. Captain Davis noticed it first. The energy patterns were unstable, flickering and wavering in ways that suggested the collective's power was not as limitless as they claimed. Lieutenant Commander Parker confirmed his observation with readings from human scanning equipment that they had smuggled into the chamber. Their power levels are fluctuating. Parker reported in a voice that carried just loud enough for nearby delegates to hear. The energy readings are dropping significantly. Something is interfering with their abilities. Dr. Johnson looked at his own instruments and saw the same thing. The quantum signatures generated by human consciousness seemed to be creating interference patterns in the space around them. Every human in the chamber was unconsciously generating a form of mental static that disrupted the collective's reality manipulation abilities. Professor Williams realized what was happening and translated the information into multiple alien languages. Their power depends on the faith and fear of those they rule. As long as everyone believed they were gods, they could maintain their abilities. But doubt weakens them. Defiance makes them vulnerable. The revelation spread through the chamber like wildfire. Species that had lived in terror of the collective for millions of years began to understand that their rulers were not the omnipotent beings they claimed to be. The energy entities on their thrones flickered more frantically as their power continued to wane. Captain Davis stepped forward again, his voice now carrying the confidence of someone who understood the true nature of their enemy. You're not gods at all, are you? You're parasites. You've been feeding off the dreams and aspirations of entire civilizations, growing strong on their surrendered potential while keeping them weak and dependent. The largest member of the collective let out what could only be described as a roar of fury and fear. Silence. You know nothing of cosmic truth. We are the guardians of order. Without us, the galaxy would tear itself apart in endless wars. But even as the entity spoke, its form was becoming less solid and more transparent. The other members of the collective were also showing signs of instability, their energy patterns breaking down as doubt and defiance spread through their domain. Dr. Johnson looked around the chamber at the hundreds of alien representatives and saw something that hadn't existed for millions of years: hope. Look around you, he called out to the assembled delegates. Look at what we could accomplish if we were free to work together as equals instead of subjects and overlords. The stars had never looked so cold to Commander Jake Martinez as they did that morning, when everything changed forever. He stood on the bridge of the USS Horizon, watching the endless darkness of space stretch out before them while his crew ran their daily checks on the ship's systems. They had been exploring the outer rim for 3 months now, mapping new star systems and checking for signs of life on distant planets. It was routine work that Jake had done 100 times before, but today felt different somehow. The communication array suddenly came alive with a sharp beeping sound that made everyone on the bridge turn their heads. Lieutenant Carol Davis, their communications officer, frowned at her screen and tapped a few buttons before looking up at Jake with confusion in her eyes. She had received thousands of messages during her career, but nothing like this one. "Sir, we're getting a priority transmission from Earth Command," she said in a voice that carried just a hint of worry. "It's coming through on all emergency channels at once." Jake walked over to her station and looked at the data streaming across the screen. The transmission was using more power than most planets generated in a year. which meant whoever was sending it wanted to make absolutely sure it got through. He had never seen anything like it before. "Put it through to the main screen," he ordered, and Carol nodded before pressing a series of buttons that filled the bridge with the image of Admiral Lisa Thompson. The Admiral's face looked tired and stressed, with dark circles under her eyes that suggested she had not slept in days. Behind her, Jake could see the busy command center of Earth's military headquarters, with dozens of officers running back and forth between workstations. Commander Martinez, the Admiral, began without any of the usual pleasantries that normally started official communications. "You and your crew need to return to Earth immediately. We have received a summons from the Ascended Collective, and they have specifically requested the presence of all human exploration vessels." Jake felt his blood turn cold at those words. Every human in the galaxy knew about the Ascended Collective, the ancient beings who ruled over all known civilizations with power that seemed to come from the gods themselves. They had transcended their physical forms millions of years ago, and now existed as pure energy that could bend reality to their will. No species dared to disobey them, and very few had ever been contacted by them directly. "A summons, Admiral," Jake repeated, trying to keep his voice steady, even though his heart was beating fast enough to power the ship's engines. "What kind of summons?" Admiral Thompson looked even more worried as she continued speaking. "The kind that no species has ever returned from unchanged, Commander. We have been ordered to send representatives to the Celestial Nexus within 30 standard days." The message was very clear about what would happen if we refused to comply. Dr. Alex Johnson, the ship's science officer, stepped forward from his position at the research station. He was a tall man with gray hair who had spent most of his life studying alien cultures and their histories. His knowledge of galactic politics was better than almost anyone else in the human fleet. "Admiral, with respect, the Collective has never shown any interest in humanity before," he said while adjusting his glasses. "When we first made contact 50 years ago, they barely acknowledged our existence. They classified us as a Level 3 civilization and told us to stay within our designated space sectors. Why would they suddenly want to meet with us now?" The Admiral's expression grew even darker as she answered his question. "That's exactly what we're trying to figure out, Doctor. Our intelligence networks have been working around the clock to understand what might have triggered this summons. What we've learned is not encouraging." She paused for a moment before continuing, and Jake could see her hands shaking slightly as she spoke. "According to our sources, the last time the Collective summoned a species to the Celestial Nexus was the Karathi Empire about 200 years ago. They were accused of violating the sacred protocols by developing weapons technology beyond their assigned tier level. The Collective wiped out their entire home system as an example to other species. The bridge fell silent except for the quiet humming of the ship's life support systems. Every human who traveled in space had heard stories about the sacred protocols, the complex set of rules that governed how advanced each species was allowed to become. The Ascended Collective maintained perfect order throughout the galaxy by making sure that no civilization could grow powerful enough to challenge their authority. Lieutenant Carol Davis looked up from her communication station, with fresh data scrolling across her screen. "Sir, I'm detecting similar transmissions being sent to all human colonies and outposts. Everyone is being recalled to Earth for this meeting with the Collective." Jake walked back to his command chair and sat down heavily, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. He had joined the space exploration program to discover new worlds and expand humanity's knowledge of the universe. He had never expected to be involved in something that could determine the fate of his entire species. Dr. Johnson moved to stand beside the captain's chair, his voice quiet but urgent. "Commander, I've been reviewing our recent activities and comparing them to the historical records of other species who were summoned by the Collective. There's a pattern that I find deeply troubling." "What kind of pattern, Doctor?" Jake asked, though he was not sure he wanted to hear the answer. Every species that was called to the Nexus had been pushing the boundaries of their assigned limitations, Dr. Johnson explained while pulling up data on his tablet. The Karathi developed new weapons. The Velthari Empire created faster-than-light communication systems. The Nexari Confederation began exploring regions of space that were declared off-limits by the Collective. Jake felt a cold realization washing over him as he understood what the doctor was suggesting. "And we've been doing all of those things and more for the past 50 years. Dr. Johnson nodded grimly. We've developed new propulsion systems, created artificial intelligence networks, established colonies outside our designated sectors, and made contact with species that the collective had forbidden us to approach. From their perspective, we're probably the most dangerous threat to galactic order that they've encountered in centuries. Admiral Thompson's voice came through the communication system once more, cutting through their conversation. Commander, I need you to understand the gravity of this situation. Earth's leadership is divided on how to respond to this summons. Some believe we should comply and hope for mercy. Others think we should prepare for war. But everyone agrees that we need our best people involved in whatever comes next. Jake looked around the bridge at his crew, seeing the same mixture of fear and determination in their eyes that he felt in his own heart. They were explorers and scientists, not warriors. But they were also human beings who refused to bow down to anyone who tried to limit their potential for growth and discovery. We'll set course for Earth immediately, Admiral, he said with more confidence than he actually felt, and we'll be ready for whatever the collective has planned for us. The journey to the Celestial Nexus took 14 days through hyperspace, but it felt like 14 years to everyone aboard the human diplomatic vessel. Captain Ryan Davis stood at the observation deck watching the swirling colors of hyperspace flow past the reinforced windows while trying to calm his racing thoughts. He had been chosen to lead humanity's delegation, not because he was the most senior officer, but because he had more experience dealing with alien cultures than anyone else in the fleet. Behind him, Dr. Alex Johnson was reviewing files on his tablet for what must have been the 100th time since they left Earth. The xenobiologist had spent weeks preparing for this meeting by studying every known interaction between the Ascended Collective and other species. What he found in those records was not encouraging, but he kept hoping to discover some clue that might help humanity avoid the fate that had befallen so many civilizations before them. Professor Kate Williams sat at a nearby table, surrounded by translation equipment and linguistic analysis tools. As Earth's leading expert on alien languages, she would be responsible for making sure that nothing was lost in translation during the negotiations. She had learned 17 different alien languages during her career, but the Ascended Collective communicated through methods that went far beyond simple words and sounds. The ship's intercom crackled to life with the voice of Commander Lisa Park, their pilot. Captain Davis, we're approaching the edge of collective space. You might want to see this. Ryan walked to the bridge with Dr. Johnson and Professor Williams following close behind him. What they saw through the main view screen made all three of them stop breathing for several seconds. The Celestial Nexus was unlike anything that human science had ever conceived or imagined. The station was a massive, crystalline structure that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at the same time. It pulsed with energy that made the fabric of space itself ripple and bend around its edges. The thing was larger than most solar systems, with sections that appeared and disappeared as if they existed in different realities. Just looking at it made Ryan feel dizzy and slightly sick. My God, Professor Williams whispered, her voice barely audible above the humming of the ship's engines. How is something like that even possible? Dr. Johnson was taking readings with his scientific instruments, but the numbers on his screens kept changing, as if the laws of physics themselves were unstable near the nexus. The energy output from that structure is beyond measurement, he said while shaking his head in amazement. It's generating power levels that could fuel entire galaxies for millions of years. Commander Park's voice came over the intercom again, but this time she sounded nervous. Captain, we're receiving docking instructions. From the Nexus, they're directing us to Bay 7432. I'm also detecting hundreds of other ships from species all across the galaxy. As their vessel approached the docking bay, Ryan could see the other diplomatic ships through the view screen. There were the sleek silver vessels of the Zephyrian Empire, the organic-looking bioships of the Karathi survivors, and dozens of other designs from civilizations he had only read about in reports. Every major species in the galaxy seemed to be represented here. The docking process was unlike anything they had experienced before. Instead of using mechanical clamps and airlocks, the Nexus simply absorbed their ship into its structure, using some kind of energy field that passed right through their hull without causing any damage. One moment they were in space, and the next moment they were inside a vast chamber filled with breathable atmosphere. A delegation of Zephyrian officials was waiting for them when they disembarked from their ship. The Zephyrians were tall, elegant beings with blue-tinted skin and large eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. Their ambassador, who introduced himself as Velazarian, approached Ryan with what appeared to be a mixture of curiosity and pity. "So these are the humans who have caused so much trouble for the Ascended Collective," the ambassador said in perfect English. Though his voice carried undertones that suggested he was speaking in multiple languages simultaneously. "You are either very brave or very foolish to have come here." Dr. Johnson stepped forward and bowed slightly in the traditional Zephyrian greeting. "We come seeking understanding, Ambassador. Humanity has no desire for conflict with the Collective or any other species in the galaxy." The Zephyrian ambassador's expression grew sad as he looked at the human delegation. "Understanding is not what you will find here, Dr. Johnson. The Collective has already made their decision about your species. This gathering is merely a formality before the sentence is carried out." Professor Williams activated her translation devices and began recording everything that was being said. She had studied the Zephyrian language extensively and knew that their words often carried multiple meanings that could be easily missed. "What kind of sentence are you talking about, Ambassador?" "The same sentence that has been passed on every species that dared to challenge the cosmic order," Velazarian replied, while gesturing toward the massive chamber around them. "Total annihilation, followed by the erasure of all records that your civilization ever existed." The humans exchanged worried glances, but Captain Davis kept his voice steady as he responded. "Then why bring us here at all? If the decision has already been made, why not simply destroy Earth and be done with it?" The ambassador's large eyes seemed to grow even sadder as he answered. "Because the Collective wishes to make an example of humanity that will be remembered by every species in the galaxy for the next 1,000,000 years. They want other civilizations to see what happens to those who refuse to accept their assigned place in the cosmic hierarchy." Before anyone could respond to this chilling statement, the air around them began to shimmer and change, the massive chamber filled with beings from hundreds of different species, all of them looking frightened and confused. Ryan realized that they were all being transported to the Grand Chamber where the Collective would make their appearance. The Grand Chamber was a space that seemed to exist outside of normal reality. The walls, floor, and ceiling were made of some kind of energy that constantly shifted between different colors and patterns. In the center of the chamber stood 5 massive thrones that appeared to be carved from crystallized starlight. As thousands of representatives from across the galaxy filled the chamber, a sound began to build that was felt more than heard. It started as a low vibration that made everyone's bones ache, then grew into something that seemed to come from the fundamental forces of the universe itself. The 5 thrones began to glow brighter and brighter until they were almost too painful to look at. Then the Ascended Collective appeared. They were not physical beings in any sense that mortals could understand. They existed as patterns of pure energy and consciousness that took different forms depending on who was looking at them. To the humans, they appeared as towering figures of light and shadow that seemed to contain entire galaxies within their forms. Their presence was so overwhelming that most of the assembled delegates fell to their knees in terror and awe. But Captain Davis remained standing, as did Dr. Johnson and Professor Williams. The 3 humans looked up at the cosmic beings without bowing or showing the fear that was expected of them. This simple act of defiance sent ripples of shock through the assembled crowd and caused the Collective's attention to focus directly on the human delegation. The voice that spoke next seemed to come from everywhere, and nowhere at the same time. It bypassed the ears entirely and spoke directly to the minds of everyone present. "We are the Ascended Collective, guardians of cosmic order and keepers of the sacred protocols. We have summoned you here to witness the judgment of the species known as humanity." Ambassador Velazarian stepped forward and prostrated himself before the thrones. His voice shook with reverence and fear as he spoke. "Great ones, the charges against humanity have been compiled and verified. They stand accused of violating the sacred protocols in 17 different categories, including unauthorized technological development, expansion beyond designated sectors, and refusal to acknowledge collective authority." The largest of the energy beings pulsed with what might have been anger. "The species called humanity has committed the ultimate heresy against cosmic order. They continue to grow and expand despite being classified as a level 3 civilization. They develop technologies that exceed their assigned limitations. They explore regions of space that were declared forbidden. Most damning of all, they show no reverence for their cosmic superiors, and refused to accept the role that was assigned to them by divine will. Ryan felt the crushing weight of the collective's attention pressing down on him like the gravity of a collapsing star, but he forced himself to speak. With respect, we have never been told what our assigned role was supposed to be. We have simply followed our nature as explorers and learners. The energy being's response shook the entire chamber. Your nature is irrelevant. Your destiny was determined when this universe was young. Every species has their place in the cosmic order, and that place is not subject to negotiation or debate.